I parked and put my hazards on, then got out. I double-checked that the bag had everything as I walked up the driveway, but as I approached the porch, I saw that the front door was open. Not all the way, but enough to be strange considering it was snowing and cold. I figured it was so I could leave the bag inside the house rather than out in the snow, so when I got up to the door, I pushed it a little bit more open and slid the bag inside the house. But just as I pulled my phone out to take a picture for confirmation, I heard a woman's voice yell from across the house. She asked if I was the delivery person dropping off her order. It sounded like a young woman, maybe even early 20s.
"Yeah, I put it right here in your doorway,"
I said, not expecting the conversation. The woman responded right away, saying I could push the door open and bring the bag to her. I knew it was strange to be asking me to go inside their house, but I pushed the door open just to see where they were. Past the entrance, there was a long hallway that led to what I think was the kitchen, and on the wall, I could see the clear shadow of the woman who was presumably standing right around the corner.
Where do you want me to bring it?"
There was a long moment before the woman responded. She leaned half of her body around the corner and showed herself at the end of the hallway, telling me to just bring it over to her and gesturing with her hands for me to come in. But as she went back around the corner and out of sight, I realized that the shadow outline on the wall hadn't moved with her. It was someone else's shadow standing somewhere by her around the corner. I stood there for a second as I felt blood rush through my body. Then I quietly placed the bag down and took a few steps back before turning and rushing away from the house. I stumbled into my car and glanced back at the house as I pulled away. In the front window, the figure of a large man approached and watched as I left. I stopped at a nearby gas station to catch my breath and rethink everything that happened. It was pretty clear by how everything played out that this was some kind of setup, but I also knew the police would have nothing but my word to go off of. I did end up reporting it, but when they went to the house to ask the woman about what happened, she denied that anyone else was there and denied the officers access to search the home for anyone else. So, like I said, the police were unable to do anything at the time. What the woman and the man were trying to do by getting me inside their house is unknown, and I can only imagine that I wouldn't be here right now if I had gone inside without thinking twice. Last year, my roommate moved out of the house we had been renting together for the past 4 years. By then, both of us had gotten better jobs and were getting paid more, and the house we had wasn't the best, so it was only a matter of time before one of us moved out to get their own place. After he moved though, I was able to use more of the space in the house and actually just decided to stay there for another year or two. This happened during this time in early December. Our area was going through a week of some pretty bad snowstorms, and the office I worked at allowed us to work from home for a few days if we wanted to. Obviously, I chose to take the offer. I used my old roommate's bedroom as an office and worked throughout the day, but at one point while I was working, there was a knock at the front door. I left the room and checked who it was. There was a man on the porch in a heavy winter jacket. He didn't seem to be a worker or delivery person of any kind, just some regular guy. I opened the door, getting hit by a rush of snow and wind.
"How can I help you?"
The man smiled and apologized for interrupting my day, then explained his situation. He said his car got stuck in the snow right on the side of the road next to my house, and he didn't have a phone on him, so he asked if he could borrow mine. Obviously skeptical, I told him to give me a minute, then I closed the door and went to the other side of the house. I looked out the window at the road he was supposedly stuck on. There was a small SUV that looked like it had actually slid into the curb and gotten stuck in the snowbank. Now that I was pretty sure he wasn't lying, I grabbed a jacket and put on some shoes, then went back to the front door. I was still a bit skeptical, but I stood on the porch with him as he used my phone to call his brother, just so that if he did try to run with my phone or anything, I could chase after him or prevent him from leaving. After a quick call though, the man handed my phone back and thanked me, then walked away. I went inside and checked the window, seeing the man getting in his car. Thinking everything was settled now, I went back to the office and started working again. Around 7, I felt like I'd done enough for the day and took the rest of the night off. It was then that I remembered about the man and his car and went to check on it, but I was surprised to see that the car was still there, and I could see the man moving around inside. It had been almost 3 hours by then, which made me wonder how he was still there. Maybe he was waiting for his brother to get off of work and pick him up. I didn't know, but I went to the kitchen and made some dinner, then sat on the couch to watch TV. I stayed up until about 9:30, then went upstairs to shower and get ready for bed. I turned the water on and got in the shower, but a few minutes in, there was an abrupt and sudden banging on the front door. It was loud and harsh, completely jump-scaring me and putting me in a fear-induced frozen state for a moment. The banging was so loud, it was shaking the walls, and even across the entire house, I could hear that it was coming from the front door. They were hitting it non-stop, and I could even hear them aggressively shaking the door handle. It was such a sudden burst of chaos that it was hard for me to know what to do. I turned off the shower and quickly got dressed, but as I left my room and walked down the upstairs hallway, everything stopped. It was just silent, no more sounds at all. I stopped in place, hearing only the wind from outside and feeling the eeriness set in, before I slowly walked downstairs and up to the front door. Nobody was there anymore. I quickly ran to the window, seeing that the car was still there, but the man was not inside of it. Not knowing what to make of any of it, I called the police. When they came, they noticed multiple sets of shoe prints in the snow, but they were covered up by the storm soon after. They took the license plate of the car though and found a picture of the owner, and from what I could tell, it was the same guy that I'd helped on my porch. In the following days, they waited for him to turn up, but as far as I know, he never did. It's really disturbing to think about what could have happened that night right outside my door. Was it that same man desperately trying to get in for some reason, or someone else with a more malicious intent? It seems most think that it was the man running from someone and trying to get help, but what happened afterwards is still up for debate. Nothing is really known about that night. Where the man is now and what he was running from are just a few questions on a long list that will probably never be answered. This happened in 2015. I had just moved to a small house far from my hometown the year before, so I was still getting used to the area and hadn't met many people yet. I worked from home as well, which made it even harder. Anyway, for Christmas, I had no plans at all. My family was too far, and I didn't have enough vacation time to go out and see them, so this was actually going to be my first Christmas alone. On Christmas Eve, I stayed up working, figuring I'd just get ahead on some things so I didn't have to worry about doing anything on Christmas Day. I was working in the living room, listening to music as well, when through it, I heard something coming from outside. I pulled out one of the earbuds and listened, but didn't hear anything else, so I got up and looked around. With my earbuds in, it was hard to know what direction it came from, but I was pretty sure it was outside the house, not inside. I looked out the back window, not seeing anything, then moved to the front window and again saw nothing. But then I looked out the front door. On the porch were a set of shoe prints in the snow. They led right up to my doorstep and then back out to the driveway. There was no mail dropped off or anything at all on the porch, just the shoe prints. It was really strange and made me feel a little anxious, not knowing why anyone would be walking up to my doorstep at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I made sure the door was locked and went back to work, then got in bed soon after. It was a bit strange waking up on Christmas morning, feeling like it was any other day. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat on my chair to watch TV. I think I spent the whole morning just sitting there and watching shows and movies. I gave my parents a call and talked to them for a bit, but that was really about all I did. I thought about going out, but it was really cold and the wind was really strong, so I just stayed in for the day. By 6 p.m., I had basically done nothing all day and made some dinner, planning on going to bed early. But then I heard something outside. It was the shuffling sound of footsteps in the snow coming toward the front door. I stayed quiet, knowing nobody should be here. After a few seconds, the footsteps sounded again, walking away from the house. I went up and checked, seeing almost an identical scene to what I saw the previous night. After that, I forced myself to stay up later. I kept my eyes open until probably around 10, before I guess I fell asleep on the couch. I remember getting really tired and trying to stay up, but I didn't plan on falling asleep out there. When I woke up, the TV was still on and flashing light throughout the dark room. I sat up and paused it, then got up to go to my bedroom. As I walked down the hallway though, my eyes instantly locked on my bedroom door. It was open, but I knew I always kept it closed. I walked over and pushed it open wider, then flicked on the light. Wet shoe prints were scattered around the floor, going to and from the window. In a complete state of shock, I spun around and turned on the hallway light, now seeing more shoe prints going down toward the living room. I followed them, but they stopped right outside the living room, looking like they'd turned and went back right after seeing me on the couch. The shoe prints were nowhere else in the house. Police did what they could, but if I'm being honest, they weren't of much help. The current theory is that the man had come by the previous 2 nights to see if I was home. After not answering the door though, he likely thought I was away for the holidays. I know it's likely that he only broke into my house to rob me, but still, it's extremely disturbing, especially since I was at home sleeping when it all happened. Whoever it was though, they never came back. Last December, I traveled across the country to meet my parents and siblings for Christmas. My parents had a decent-sized house, so we would usually just all stay there and sleep on the couch or in the spare bedrooms. That being said, I didn't rent any hotels, even for the drive. It was 10 hours long, but I just didn't see a need in stopping halfway there and wasting a whole night. I left early on the 23rd, planning it out to get to the house around dinner time. As I started the drive, snow was lightly coming down. Nothing crazy, but enough to cause a bit of traffic. This went on for a few hours, until it suddenly started pouring down. It happened over just 30 minutes, going from a very light downfall to an extremely heavy storm. Along with the winds, it was nearly impossible to see anything in front of me. Most other cars started to pull off to the side of the road, but I really wanted to keep going. I drove in these horrible conditions for the better part of an hour, having a few close calls before deciding enough was enough. I pulled into a motel and sat in the parking lot, waiting for the snow to clear up. There were a lot of other cars in the parking lot, but I think most were probably trying to wait it out like I was. But as the sun started to set, there was no chance of that happening anytime soon. I reluctantly went in and got a room. I went to my room and lay down on the bed. It was around 8 o'clock at this point, and I'd figured I'd just sleep now and see if it was clear in a few hours. I set an alarm on my phone for 11, then passed out. But when I woke up, I immediately knew something was wrong. I turned and looked at my phone, seeing it was just before 2 a.m. My alarm didn't go off. I quickly got out of bed and ran up to the window. The parking lot was almost empty now, but it was still snowing pretty bad. I sat back on the bed, and after some thinking, I decided to take the loss and just spend the rest of the night there and hope for the best in the morning. I laid down, closing my eyes, but now that I was more calm, something caught my attention. A cold breeze blowing through the room, and the clear sound of wind. I sat up, seeing the window at the end of the bed was cracked open. I got up and shut it, but I was almost positive it was closed when I went to bed. It's something I definitely would have noticed, being that there was a whole storm outside. A rush of adrenaline went through me as I started to worry. I faced the rest of the room, now looking into the dark and standing still, listening for anything. Then I slowly walked around, checking for anything missing or any signs that someone had been inside. I didn't see or find anything until I went to check out the peephole. That's when I noticed that both locks on the door were now open. Someone had unlocked it from the inside. Blood rushed from my face as I locked the door and backed away, thinking through every possible horrifying scenario that I could be caught in right now. I started putting my things back into my bag and getting ready to leave, but then there was a sudden shake of the door handle. I stared at it with wide eyes, seeing the handle move back and forth like they were trying to force it open. Then it went silent. I waited for a long couple minutes before I slowly and quietly crept toward the door to check if it was safe to make a run for my car. I looked out the peephole, seeing a man leaning against the door like he was listening. I was frozen, but he must have heard something because only a few seconds later he rushed away from the door. I spent no time waiting, leaving the room soon after and getting in my car, pulling out and leaving the motel. I got lucky as nobody else was on the roads and they seemed to have just been plowed. I drove through the storm until I got to my parents' house, taking much longer than it should have. What that man was trying to do, I can't even begin to think of. They had obviously been in the room while I was sleeping and unlocked the door, but what they wanted and why they had to come back to my room, I just don't know. But if I hadn't woken up when I did and stayed asleep for just a minute longer, I might have never made it to my parents' house. Two years ago, I spent Christmas with my roommate. We were both in college and were splitting rent on a small home in the suburbs outside of the campus. Neither of our families apparently were really big on Christmas, and we were also kind of broke, so we stayed home for winter break. We still did a bit of decorating, and I'd gotten each other some cheap little gifts so we could have our own small Christmas. But other than that, we mostly planned on watching movies and maybe going to a party at night. On Christmas Day, we opened up our gifts and hung out, and around 5, my roommate wanted to go to a party by the campus. I had planned on going too, but for some reason, I was just tired and not really in the mood to go out. I encouraged him to go if he wanted to, and he took up on the offer, heading out by 6. I sat back and ate some junk food, watching TV and just relaxing, I guess. But then around 8, I just felt like getting up and doing something. With no places open, I grabbed my jacket and decided to go for a walk around to look at the houses with Christmas lights. It was cold out, but not insanely freezing. I walked around the neighborhood and through one of the nearby parks, but while I was walking through a portion of the path, I passed by a man sitting on a bench. Now, this part of the path was covered in trees and not by any houses, and the man was just sitting there alone. It was actually kind of sad, but when I passed by, he looked up at me and just gave me this really cold look. It was very strange and made me even more curious why he was out here. I walked quicker, reaching the end of the path and turning back to go home. The rest of the walk, all I was thinking about was the man and what he was up to. Something about his look just gave me a bad feeling. I got to the house and opened the front door, closing it behind me and taking my shoes off. But before I even started walking away, I heard a thump right outside the door. It startled me, having come so quickly after I'd gotten inside. I leaned over and looked through the peephole. It was the man from the path, standing on the porch and staring at the door. His face was completely blank, no smile or frown, just empty. I cracked open the door.
Are you okay?
The man looked at me with his emotionless eyes and didn't say a word. I asked again if he was okay or if he needed anything, but he didn't speak. Getting weirded out, I closed the door and went back to looking out the peephole. The man stayed there for at least a whole minute, then walked off to the side of the door until he was out of my view. I looked over, seeing the window curtains were open, giving the man a view into my house. For some reason, now I didn't want the man to see me, so I was afraid to go close the curtains. All he could probably view, though, was the Christmas tree and the couch, but it was still really unnerving knowing he was looking into my home. As I stood in place, trying to think of what to do next, a dull thud came from outside the window. I quickly stepped back and looked, seeing the man slam a large rock against the glass. His eyes were still glazed over with no emotion, making it look even more terrifying. I ran and locked myself in a room while I dialed 911, hearing the man continue to repeatedly hit the window. After a few hits, there was a pause. Then it began again, but it sounded like he may have moved to hitting the front door. This went on for what felt like several minutes, before finally it went quiet. When police pulled in, the man was nowhere around. Outside though, there were multiple cracks in the window, and the door had entire chunks of wood smashed out and laying on the ground. The police seemed to think that it was just an intoxicated person based on the information I told them, and he likely had no real reason to target me specifically. Whatever the case, the way he was acting was just insane, and if he had gotten in, there's no saying what he would have done. For the past couple years, I've worked on Uber Eats during winter break. College lets out for a whole month, and Uber Eats is the easiest work to do without having to go through job interviews and all that stuff. Besides, I didn't work during school, so this was something simple to pick up on the holidays. It was a few weeks out from Christmas when this happened. This night, it was snowing pretty heavily, but I really couldn't be picky with what days to work since I only had this set amount of time off to make enough money to last until the next break. I borrowed my dad's pickup truck and started driving. The snow must have kept a lot of other drivers home because I was getting orders all night. Big ones too, the kind that pay a lot. I did this for probably a good 3 hours, and then an order came in to pick up from a drive-through place. The house was 20 minutes from me, but the tip and everything was really good. There honestly wasn't anything unusual or off about this order. It was just as any other was. I picked it up and went on my way to the house. From a quick look at the map, it looked like it was in a pretty nice neighborhood on the other side of the county. I'd been around there before, but not really inside the neighborhoods. By this time, it was 11 p.m., and a lot of snow had started to stack up on the roads. I was also getting tired, so I agreed with myself that this would be the last delivery, and then I'd go home and work again tomorrow. Once I got to the neighborhood, I drove through the street and looked at the houses as I passed by. They were all huge and had a ton of land between each of them, but none of the houses seemed to be very new. They had that typical older mansion style of basically just being really large and nothing else. Anyway, it took a while to get to the address I was supposed to deliver to. The driveway was covered in at least a foot of snow, so I parked on the road. While I got out and walked up to the house, getting snow all over my pants and shoes, I noticed no lights were on in the windows, and there was a piece of paper taped to the front door. Once I got up to the porch, I took a closer look. On the top of the page, it said notice in big red font, and the first few lines stated it was issued by the county. But before I got too far in, I heard footsteps crunching in the snow behind me. I turned around, seeing a man approaching me coming from around the garage. He had a short buzz cut and was wearing a dirty jacket.
Just dropping off your order,
I said to break the silence, but the man continued walking up without saying anything. Once he was a few feet away, I could tell there was something off about him. I guess it was just a gut feeling. He looked at me with cold and tired eyes, then held his hand out for the bag. I reached over and gave it to him, but he didn't move. He was standing right on the path leading to the driveway, and as the seconds passed, I realized how completely strange it was for him to even be out here, and even more so that he wasn't heading inside now that he had the bag.
Have a good night, sir,
I said, stepping to the side and starting to walk past him. The man stayed where he was, before abruptly turning, and in the corner of my eye, it looked like he swung his arm out as if trying to grab me. I stumbled back and faced him as he began stepping toward me, saying, "Come with me," while reaching his hand out. I kept moving back as fast as I could in the thick snow, and the man continued to chase me, yelling at me to stop running. Once I got a good footing, I was able to outrun him and get in my car, backing out before he even had the chance to get to me. As I drove off, I looked in my mirror and saw the man standing in the driveway and just watching. I called the cops once I was out of the neighborhood, but the man was already gone. Later that night though, they told me that the house wasn't currently owned by anyone at the moment, which I assumed the note on the door had something to do with. What the man was trying to do is unknown, but that whole situation has put me on edge whenever I pull up to a house with all their lights off, wondering if it might be the same man. I was visiting my family for the holidays last year. They live 15 hours away, and I usually try to tough it out in one long drive, but this year snow had come early and made driving a lot slower, so I was prepared to stop at a hotel somewhere along the way. I didn't book anything in advance since I didn't know how far I'd get before wanting to stop. I was just going to pull into wherever and see if they had a room available. When I left, it was barely snowing, but the further out I got, the more snow seemed to be coming down. Roads were still clear, but everyone was definitely driving more slow and carefully. Around 8 hours into the drive, I still hadn't made it halfway there. I was getting frustrated as it was already 9 p.m. and it was just taking so long. I should have been over halfway there at this point, but now I felt like I had to keep going so that my drive tomorrow wouldn't be even longer. The snow had let up a little bit, but it still had accumulated on the road because there were no plow trucks. I drove as long as I could, making it to 12 a.m. before deciding I'd had enough and needed some sleep. I pulled off the next exit and into a small motel parking lot. It was a long one-story building with 10 or so rooms. As expected, it wasn't the nicest looking place. The outside looked really old, and even the lights on the sign were dim and half burnt out. I parked in a random place near the rooms and got out, walking up to the main entrance area. Inside, it was a very small room with a front desk, but there was a sign propped up on the counter. It said, "Be back in 15, with a little picture of a coffee cup on it. The chances of me arriving while the worker was taking their break just showed my lack of luck on this drive. I walked out and back to my car, but this time, when I looked around the parking lot, I noticed something that I hadn't before. It was completely empty. I stood there in the cold and looked for a minute and didn't see a single car, and from the looks of it, it didn't look like any cars had even been in the parking lot tonight. I got back in my car and turned on the heat to warm up while I waited. Seeing no cars and nobody at the desk had me second guessing whether the sign was actually for someone taking a break. There were no places within 15 minutes anyway, so I don't know where they could have driven off to if they were taking a break. I sat back and tried to think of what to do next, but my eyes and head were so tired and I ended up passing out in my seat. When I woke up, a few hours must have passed. The snow had started pouring down again, and the wind was making my car sway. I sat up and looked toward the front entrance of the motel, but immediately made eye contact with a man peering in through my window. I jolted back as he stepped away and yelled something toward the parking lot. I looked behind him, seeing a truck on the other side. Another man got out of the driver's side and started walking up. The one by me then walked around my car, trying all the door handles. I snapped out of it and put my car in reverse, trying to back out, before the wheels spun under me. Now the men were moving quicker, one yelling at the other to come over to his side and break the back window. I continued moving my car back and forth, trying to get through the thick patch of snow, but the sudden shattering of the back window only made it harder. I was trying everything now, as one of the men was reaching in for the door handle, and just when he put half of his body through the window and opened the door, I finally got traction and spun the car around. The man fell out, and the other tried to get in his truck to follow me as I turned the car and made my way out of the parking lot. Once I was back on the road though, they stopped following me. Although I don't feel like it was entirely my fault, I definitely should have not let myself fall asleep in that parking lot, especially in the middle of nowhere like that. What those men had planned could have been anything. They were obviously prepared though, and it almost seemed like they knew that this motel parking lot was an easy place to target people. But whatever it was, I'll probably never know. It was early December. I was at home this night, spending my day off inside by the fireplace. It was way too cold and snowy out for my liking. I did a bunch of things around the house that needed to get done, but otherwise, it was a relaxing day. I had the news running in the background, listening to how high winds and possible blizzards were to be expected starting tonight. By 5, I was already starting to notice it getting worse outside. I sat on the couch and turned on a different channel. Around 7 though, I could hear wind slamming against the house, and it really did sound like there was a blizzard. I got up and went to the window facing the backyard to see how it looked outside. At first, all I saw was snow rushing to the ground with almost no visibility. But then I saw something else. A figure walking through my backyard. My backyard was pretty big and didn't have a fence, so it wouldn't have been that unexpected if it weren't for the blizzard going on outside. Whoever was out there was just walking at a regular pace, going toward the end of my yard, before the snow and darkness took over any sight I had of them. I stayed by the window for a minute, trying to catch one more look and figure out what they were doing, but I didn't see anything. I was honestly scared for them, but also couldn't see why they'd be out there at all. The end of my yard that they were walking to led to a road, but it wouldn't get them anywhere for miles, which was not doable on foot. I went back to the TV, but I still couldn't help thinking about it. And only 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I went over and cracked it open. It was a man in a heavy winter jacket. His nose was bright red, and his face was pale white, like he'd been out in the cold for a while. I couldn't know if this was the same person I'd seen in my backyard, but my immediate guess was that it was.
"How can I help you?"
I asked. The man let out a humble smile and spoke through shaking teeth that he was waiting for a ride to pick him up, and asked if he could stay in my house for a few minutes to shelter from the cold just until the ride got here. I took a moment to respond because I actually considered it, given the state of the weather. It's easy to say that under no circumstance would you let a random man inside your house, but when they're practically freezing to death on your doorstep and asking for your help, the answer on what to do isn't as black and white. I told him he could wait on my porch, which had an overhang that blocked the snow, and offered to give him an old jacket of mine if he needed it. The man didn't look too happy, but just nodded and went off to the side and sat on the chair I had out there. I closed and locked the door, then went upstairs to grab my old jacket. It was way too big for me and was in horrible condition, but obviously that shouldn't matter in this kind of scenario. I picked it up and walked downstairs, about to unlock the door and open it, but something stopped me just a moment before. I don't know what it was, but it made me hesitate. I leaned over and looked through the peephole. The man was now standing right up against the door with his hand on the handle, like he was preparing to push it open as soon as I unlocked it. I felt my heart rate increasing as I took a couple steps back and quietly pulled my phone out to dial 911. As I whispered into the phone, I just stared at the door with wide eyes, knowing what was waiting for me on the other side. Once the police said they were on their way, I slowly crept over and looked out again. The man wasn't there, not on my porch or anywhere in my front yard. He was just gone, like he knew that I had called the police. Nothing else was found that night, and no signs of him ever showed up again. What he would have done if I had opened the door, I can't be sure of, but hopefully he never comes back. I do deliveries for my local Papa John's. I'm in college, so this is just one of the few jobs I could choose from. A few of my friends work here too, but we're all delivery drivers, so even when we have the same shifts, we don't really see each other. Anyway, this happened to me last December while I was picking up some extra shifts before Christmas. This night, it was snowing a good amount, making deliveries take longer than usual, while also getting more deliveries than usual. I was never too stressed about work, though having to go non-stop for hours on end was definitely not as enjoyable. At 9:30, I grabbed my next set of orders to deliver and got in my car to get the directions up. I had 2 orders, and the houses were just 5 minutes from each other, but they were both pretty far from the shop. They were 15 minutes away, which was more like 25 minutes in this weather. The first part of the drive was normal, but then it began taking me toward the less visited part of town. The houses here were older, and most of the shops in the area had closed. Nobody ever came around here unless they lived here, because it was so old and just wasn't up to today's standards. After 20 minutes of driving, I pulled into one of the neighborhoods and drove down the road toward the first house. The road was very bare, no cars parked on the side, and most of the houses kind of looked empty. Once I got to the first address, I parked on the road and walked up to the front door. A kind old man answered the door and paid for the pizza. Then I went back and set the directions for the next house. It was in the same neighborhood, but I realized as I drove that it was taking me deeper into the neighborhood, to the point where there were less houses and more space between them. By the time I got to the address, I couldn't see any other houses around. It was just trees surrounding the area. Again, I parked on the street and walked up to the front door. I knocked and waited patiently on the porch. It was pretty cold out though, and the snow making my clothes soaked wasn't helping. Finally, after a minute, the door opened. It was a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd just woken up. Her hair was messy, and she had tired, emotionless eyes.
I have your order here for 2 pizzas,
I said, holding out the boxes and giving her the total to pay. She took the boxes and placed them on the table next to her, then told me to wait a moment for her to get cash. Another minute went by before they opened the door again. She started sifting through some cash, counting it slowly and trying to add it all up. There was definitely something weird about her. It's hard to pinpoint what it was exactly, but everything she was doing was just very odd. Then, as if she wasn't struggling enough on counting the cash, she started up small talk with me. Normal stuff, like how my day was and all that. I responded politely, but it was just really weird, like she was stalling. At some point while she was talking, I looked back at my car just to distance myself from the uncomfortable situation for a moment, but I was quick to see a man standing right next to it. He was looking in the windows and doing something to the door, but when I looked back at the woman, her face had shifted into anger. I figured it all out too late though, as she reached out and grabbed me, then started yelling to the man by my car. He turned around and started sprinting towards us as the woman tried to pull me into the house. I pushed her away and broke free. Then my instincts took hold of me and I sprinted into the trees. I could hear the man's heavy footsteps crunching in the snow behind me all the way through the forest, until finally they started to fade away. After 2 minutes of sprinting, I stopped to catch my breath. Luckily, the moon was lighting up the forest enough for me to navigate through it and back to one of the streets in the neighborhood. I called 911 once I got service, and after 10 minutes of waiting in the cold, an officer arrived. Another patrol car went to the house, finding the man outside in the act of trying to break into my car. To keep things from dragging on, basically the motive was likely due to the couple running out of money and resorting to robbing my vehicle. The whole distraction was so that the man could rob my car without me ever knowing, but since I saw what he was doing, it's not really clear what they would have done. Maybe they would have just let me go, but it's obvious I would have reported them, so I don't think it's likely they would have. I'm just thankful for getting away unharmed, and for being the first victim they tried it on before getting arrested, and never having the chance to do anything to anyone else. This was just last winter, in early February. I was driving to my next DoorDash order. I was a bit tired, as I'd been driving for the last 4 hours, and it was almost 12 a.m. After this one, I was definitely calling it a night and heading home, as I was worried about getting sleepy on the road, especially with all the ice and snow. I was driving down a fairly empty road though. It was a side road that connected two of the main towns in our city, but there was a 5-mile stretch that had nothing. No buildings or houses or anywhere to stop. As I was driving down this section, I don't really know what happened, but I just got hit with a wave of tiredness that made me lose focus on the road for just a few seconds, but that was all it took, I guess. I hit a patch of ice and slid toward the side, and although I fully woke back up at this point, it was too far gone. I tried to steer back onto the road, but my car just slid straight off and into the small ditch between the road and the woods. It wasn't a bad crash at all, since the snow lightened the impact, but it still made me a little shaky, and I knew right away that it was going to be impossible to get out of this. My car was stuck on the incline of the ditch and in thick snow. I didn't even bother getting out to try and see how bad it was, though I did test my luck at trying to maneuver the car to get some traction, but if anything, I just made it worse. In the middle of trying to figure everything out, I noticed a car's headlights down the road. At first, I thought it was just a car passing by, but after a few seconds, it was clear that they weren't moving. Someone must have just been parked down the road with their headlights on, which I found to be a little unnerving at the coincidence of it being on this long, empty road. They weren't close enough to have stopped to try and help me, but they weren't far enough either to not see my headlights. I pulled out my phone and called my dad, knowing he'd still be awake and hoping he'd be able to help me. I'd never been in a situation like this, so I really didn't know what to do. He said he would call roadside assistance and then drive down to wait with me. I thanked him and felt relief knowing he would be down here in just a few minutes. I looked back out on the road, looking for the headlights from the car I'd just seen, but now they were gone. It was too dark to see anything that far without lights, so I didn't know if they'd driven away or were still there and had just turned off their lights. It started to creep me out the more I thought about it. I kept my eyes down the road, not looking away for more than a few seconds as I began getting paranoid. It was something about the silence as well that made it more uneasy, only hearing the wind outside my car and nothing else. Then, after 3 minutes of waiting, I saw a figure walking toward my car. He was down the road, coming from the direction where the headlights had been. I watched him as he slowly made his way through the snow, getting to just about 15 feet from the front of my car. Then he stopped. He stood there in the snow, facing me, but not moving. I couldn't see much of him as he had a hoodie covering his face, but the way he just stood there in my headlights started to terrify me. After a moment, I honked my horn softly a few times, just to let them know that I was in the car and that I could see them. They still didn't move or acknowledge me, but just as I was pulling out my phone to call my dad again, the man turned around and walked away, disappearing down the road. I still called my dad to let him know about this really strange person that was out here, and he said he was just a minute away. I stayed on the phone with him this time, and only 30 seconds later, I saw headlights turn on down the road and begin moving toward my car. Once they were right across the road, they parked and turned off their lights. I couldn't see over the ditch, but I heard a door open as I yelled through the phone what was going on. But then my dad's car pulled right in front of my view and screeched to a stop. I heard him yell at someone as they got back in their car and sped away. They didn't come back, but my dad said the guy was holding something in his hands that looked like he was going to break into my car with. Everything went okay after that though, and the car ended up not even having much damage to it. I'm not sure what was about to happen that night, but I know I'm really lucky to have not found out. I do Uber Eats on the weekends and sometimes on days when school is out. This happened just a couple weeks before our school's holiday break. It was a Friday night and I didn't have any plans at all, so I figured why not make a few bucks instead of being bored and laying around the house all day. I started driving and set up the app to start getting orders. It wasn't snowing out, but it was really cold and windy, and there was still a thin layer of snow on the roads from earlier in the day. I think it was 6 p.m. when I started, and I did a few orders before I got one to pick up from a nearby Burger King. Once I got the food, I checked on the app where I was going. It was clear at first that it wasn't a house address, but when I zoomed in, I was a little more confused to see it was at the corner of two streets, looking like maybe a gas station. Although finding it to be unusual, I clicked begin route and started driving over. I didn't think it was anything bad. I just thought it was going to be an awkward interaction since I'd probably have to find the person in the parking lot and give it to them directly. Usually I never see the customers and just do a quick drop off. As I got closer and drove up to the intersection it was at, I saw that it was a gas station that was right in the spot the directions were taking me. The gas station itself looked normal, but no cars were in the parking lot. I pulled in and parked in one of the spots at the back, then stayed in my car and tried to look around for anyone. The app should have let them know that I'd arrived, so I was expecting someone to be out here waiting for me. But even after a couple minutes, nobody was here. I sent a text through the app, just letting them know that I was in the parking lot and waiting for them. Then I got out of my car to see if I could get a better look around. The whole intersection was empty. No cars were passing by, and all the stores across the street seemed to be closed for the night. The longer I stood out there, the more unsettled I got. I checked my phone, still seeing no response from the customer. I was just about to get back into my car before a truck pulled into the gas station. They passed the pumps and drove right up to me, parking just a couple spots away. It was an older, dark red pickup with tinted windows. The first thought to come through my head was why would they order for delivery if they were just going to end up driving here anyway? I'd thought before that maybe they were a worker at the gas station or were just hanging out here for some reason, but now this was far more suspicious than it already was. The driver door opened and a man stepped out of the truck. From one look at him, he had a very disheveled appearance, like something you'd expect from someone living on the road. Even his clothes looked dirty, stained, and torn. As he got out, I held up the bag with a slight smile, but the man didn't even look at it. He kept his eyes locked on me as he approached, and something struck me, giving me the feeling to get out of there immediately. I set the bag on the ground, and almost right away, the man started walking faster as if he knew I was going to leave. I got in my car and started backing out just as the man got up to my door, but then he ran right back to his truck, leaving the food on the ground. As I left the gas station, I saw him back out quickly and start speeding toward the exit I was leaving from. I floored it, going through a red light and just speeding down the road until I got to where more cars were. The truck tried to follow me for a minute, but then turned away. Once I was safe, I called the police, but really nothing came of it. In the heat of the moment, I never even thought to check the man's license plate, though thinking back, I'm not sure if he even had one. I don't know what he was doing, or what would have happened if I didn't leave when I did, but knowing that I was so close to finding out is still horrifying. I was driving for DoorDash on the weekend to make some extra money. I worked a day job, so I could only start driving later in the night. When I started, it was a little past 9. I got my first order and dropped it off, then drove back to where the restaurants were. I drove in circles for a while, maybe 10 minutes without getting a single order. It was late, but on the weekends there would usually still be a decent amount of orders. Finally one popped up and I accepted it, though it was a small order with a small tip. After that one, I waited in a parking lot for almost 20 minutes before the next order came through. Obviously, this wasn't ideal, having to wait so long between orders and not even getting to choose which orders to accept unless I wanted to wait even longer. This order was another small one, but some money was better than none, so I accepted it. I picked up their bag from Taco Bell and counted the items to make sure it was right. 2 tacos and some packets of hot sauce. That was it. The delivery fee was probably more expensive than the food. I confirmed that I picked up the order, then got the directions to the house. It was 10 minutes away in some regular neighborhood. A few minutes into the drive, I pulled up to a red light. There was almost nobody on the road at this time of night, so I was just sitting at this empty intersection, waiting for it to turn green, when a truck pulled up next to me. I unconsciously looked over slightly, but the man in the truck caught my attention enough to make me turn my head fully. He was sticking his head out of the window and looking down into my car. Not at me, but at my passenger seat, which had the DoorDash bag in it. I looked back and saw the light was green, so I pressed on the gas. I had no idea why he was looking in my car, but he made it very obvious and didn't even try to hide it. I checked my mirrors and the truck was now in my lane, cruising a good distance behind me. As I continued driving along my route, the truck stayed behind me, but I couldn't say for sure if he was following me or not because the route was straight all the way until the neighborhood. When I turned in, I stared at my mirrors, waiting anxiously for the truck to pass the entrance, but after 10 seconds, he turned in behind me. There was a chance he just lived here, and I knew that, but after seeing him looking in my car, I felt like I was justified in my suspicions. The route had me go down a few turns in the neighborhood before taking me down to the last road with the address on it. I turned, and right away I saw the dead end sign a few houses down. I braked and pulled over, staring at my rearview mirror. The truck pulled in behind me and parked. As I waited in my car, trying to come up with a plan, the truck behind me was just sitting there with its headlights on. Then I got a text. It was from the DoorDash customer, asking when the delivery would be arriving. This was all coming together, and I realized that the man in the truck, likely my customer, was waiting for me to get out of my car. Even though I knew what was going on, I still had no way of getting out of it. After a minute of me panicking to figure an escape, the man got out of his truck. He walked down to my car, but stopped right by the trunk. I watched in my mirror as he stood there, looking at me through the back windshield. It was a tense moment, making my head panic with thoughts. Then all of a sudden, he slammed something into the windshield, shattering it. I put the car in drive and floored it, just as the man jumped onto the back and tried to crawl in through the broken glass. He fell off as I made a tight U-turn, and with the time it took for him to get up, I was able to carefully maneuver between his truck without any more damage. I saw him wobble across the street as I left and called 911. When police got there, all they found were the broken shards of glass laying in the road. I'm very thankful to have made it out with nothing but a broken windshield, but that night had me shaken up for months. I just hope he's not out there trying to trap more people and do who knows what to them. I'm an Uber driver, mainly working in a large suburb outside Las Vegas. The city is a bit sketchy sometimes, but this suburb is known for being a nicer area, so I never found myself worrying too much. Sure, I'd get some weird people sometimes, but they were usually just drunk, high, or otherwise intoxicated in some way. I'd worked for a few months with no issues and found myself actually enjoying the job. On this night, I was working around my usual time between 6 and 10 p.m. It was one of those nights where I was getting a lot of people and making a lot of money. When 10 o'clock came around, I chose to keep grinding out these pickups and make as much as I could. The very next order after 10 was from someone 18 minutes away at an undefined location. This wasn't out of the ordinary. It usually just meant they were on the side of a road somewhere or outside of some place that wasn't on the map. I zoomed in and saw it was right next to a storage garage. I began the drive, and when I was 5 minutes away, I got a call from the customer.
I'm gonna be late. I need you to wait a few minutes for me. Thanks.
He said quickly while breathing heavily like he just ran a mile. The man hung up right after. I can't say I'd ever had someone tell me that they were gonna be late, but I didn't mind waiting a few minutes. I knew if I canceled it, then he'd have to wait another 10 to 20 minutes for a new driver to get there, and I was hoping that by waiting, he'd give me a little extra tip money. When I arrived, I didn't see anyone outside, so I pulled in and parked in the storage garage parking lot. I waited for 5 minutes, then I saw a man in my mirror. He was walking quickly out of the storage building, holding a large duffel bag. When he got in my car, a nasty odor came from him. I also saw that he was dripping in sweat, and it was really gross. I'd picked up people from the gym before, so this wasn't too terrible, but it never made for a good experience. I tried to not make a face and greeted him. The man said nothing, so I got back on the road. During the ride, the man held the duffel bag on his lap and stared forward without speaking a word. It made me feel uncomfortable, so I didn't speak either. After a 20-minute drive of awkwardness, I finally got to the destination. It was a corner of a street, not an address. Before I could even shift into park, the man hurried out and started walking away. After all that, I wasn't expecting any sort of tip, which was a disappointment, and enough so to get me to call it quits for the night. During my drive home, I noticed that smell never left my car, even when I tried rolling the windows down. It was so bad that I had to pull over and check to see if he had left something in the back seat. I opened the door and immediately saw some red spots on the seat. I'm no expert, but it looked like blood. I called the police, and after some looking, they confirmed that it was, and there was a lot of it. We tried to track the Uber account, and the next day, they even contacted the storage unit, but had no luck with identifying the man. After thinking back on all of it though, I'm sure that guy did something terrible just minutes before I picked him up. I mean, he was sweating and carrying a duffel bag with blood soaked into it. And on top of all that, he used fake accounts with both Uber and the storage unit. It really showed me that even in a place that's considered to be nice and safe, there's still terrible people doing terrible things. I took a week off from Uber, then got back to it, but I'm way more cautious about who I'm picking up. I'm a truck driver for a moving company on the East Coast. We specialize in cross-country moving, typically moving people to the far West Coast, which can take anywhere from 20 to 40 hours depending on the locations. I only did the driving for the company, not any of the boxing or loading, so the actual job was 100% just driving and picking up or dropping off the trailer at the houses. I'd been working with this company for almost 4 years at the time. This job was like every other. I got to the pickup address and loaded up the trailer full of the customer's belongings. This was a 30-hour drive in total, which I would do with 2 to 3 short rest stops. The hardest states to drive through are in the Midwest, specifically Iowa and Nebraska. There's absolutely nothing there. It's just dead roads with endless fields of grass beside them. It makes for a very boring and therefore tiring drive. As I passed through the Iowa border into Nebraska, the sun had just set and I'd been on the road for about 20 hours. I took a short break already a couple states back, but was just about ready for another. My eyes were heavy and I could feel the drowsiness coming in, but a few more miles down, I saw something on the side of the road. A car was stopped off to the side of my lane with its headlights on. It was a narrow road, so I slowed down to carefully pass. As I did, I noticed the exhaust was steaming, so the car was still running. There was also a man leaning against the driver door and looking right at me. I passed by and gave him a nod, but as I got further down the road, I saw him get back into the car. It was very strange for someone to be sitting on the side of an empty road with a car that still runs. He didn't look like he was in any sort of trouble. He looked like he was waiting. I checked my mirrors often, but the car's headlights disappeared behind me after a few minutes. I was a bit more awake now, but my eyes still felt heavy. Only a mile or so more down the road, I saw another car. This one was sideways in the middle of the road, and as I got closer, I saw another vehicle on the side. It was a large box van. I wasn't sure exactly of the situation, but seeing that gave me a bad feeling. I eased into my brakes, but the car stayed in the middle of the road, so I was forced to come to a full stop. I was maybe 20 yards away and could see multiple men standing along the road, and one man in front of the car. I'd have to be the dumbest person in the world to not understand what this was at this point. With no better options, I started moving the truck backward. The men stayed where they were with this horrifying confidence. Then a light shined behind me and a car approached, blocking the way back. A man got out of the car, sprinting at the back of my trailer, and at the same time, all of the men in the front started sprinting at me too. In that instant, my mind went blank and all of my adrenaline took over. I slammed on the gas as I heard a pop on the back of the trailer and the doors swung open. The men in front yelled and tried to stand in my way, but once they saw I wasn't stopping, they jumped on the side of the road. I rammed right into the car, knocking it off the road and completely destroying it. A few gunshots sounded in the distance, but none hit. I could hear cargo falling out of the trailer for the next 5 miles before I was able to call the police and meet an officer on the road. Of course, this was a total mess, but as it all unfolded, it turned out to be much more than just a random attack and robbery. When police arrived at the scene, the car I'd slammed into was left behind, being damaged beyond drivable. With it, they tracked down one of the members of the attackers, who gave up information on the others. They had information on the rich homeowners that were moving and planned to stop me and steal all of the belongings with their box van. They never said what exactly they would have done to me after they robbed the truck, but I don't think it's a stretch to assume that it would have been a lot easier for them to not leave any loose ends.
I'm a 22-year-old gal, and my boyfriend and I shared this house that had its fair share of quirks. The incident I'm about to spill the beans on went down in December 2022. Let me set the stage a bit for you. Our humble abode sat in a neighborhood that didn't exactly scream safety first, and there was always something bizarre brewing. Our house, smack in the middle of it all, faced this narrow alleyway that connected our backyard to the property next door. Now, the neighbors weren't exactly buddy-buddy types, as their place was front-facing and looking all fancy toward the main street. Our backyards were separated by this rusty chain-link fence with a gate. It was one of those emergency access-only deals, thanks to the house deed. You see, this alleyway was so tight that even my boyfriend's hulking pickup truck had to pull off some acrobatics just to squeeze through. And as if the universe itself wanted to keep us under wraps, our neighbor's parked car always had our house playing hide-and-seek from anyone trying to peep from the main street. Now, onto that chilly December night. It was just me at home, thanks to my boyfriend's surprise work call. The clock had just struck 10 p.m., and I figured, why not order some late-night grub from Applebee's? I know, late for takeout, right? But I had no clue my boyfriend would be out so darn long. Little did I know, I was in for the scare of a lifetime. I cozied up with my takeout, ready to catch up on some TV. And then it happened. A notification on my phone, courtesy of the motion sensor lighting camera in our backyard. Initially, I brushed it off, thinking maybe our neighbors were up to some late-night antics. But boy, was I in for a curveball. I glanced at the live feed and there he was, a man clutching what looked like a white plastic bag, crouched near our entrance gate. Another shady figure lurked on the opposite side of our yard, near a tree. Panic gripped me as I dialed my boyfriend and spilled the beans about the unwanted guests in our backyard. His voice urged me to play it cool, turn off the lights and hush our barking furballs. I scooped up our canine pals and sought refuge in the closet, waiting for my boyfriend's next call. Truth be told, I was too rattled to dial 911, so my boyfriend made the call on my behalf. And let's be real, I wasn't about to flip those lights off just in case someone out there was watching and figured out we weren't alone. As I waited in the closet, I kept a vigilant eye on the live camera feed, praying I wouldn't see those creeps again. At last, they disappeared from the screen. I replayed the footage, heart racing, only to notice something eerie. They'd entered our neighbor's driveway, slinked through the gate, and craftily as a fox, avoided setting off our camera as they approached our bedroom window. It was at this point that the motion-activated light flicked on, and the camera's robotic voice chimed, "Hi, you're now being recorded." Our bedroom window, the biggest one we had, was right at the back of the house, and it would have been a piece of cake for them to boost themselves up and check if it was open. But thank the stars above, we had a hefty wooden dresser blocking their way, making any attempt at breaking in impossible. My boyfriend rang me back to deliver the news. The police were en route and instructed me to stay frosty. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the blue and red flashing lights of the police cruisers in our backyard. They looked bewildered, trying to pinpoint which house was ours. I dashed out to meet them, introduced myself, and gave them the lowdown on the whole situation. As I recounted the spine-chilling events, my boyfriend arrived back home. We dished out all the deets to the police and showed them the footage. Sadly, there wasn't much they could do, as the creeps had vanished from our backyard. Nevertheless, we insisted on having the incident officially documented. One of the officers mentioned that it seemed like these folks had their eyes on something in our yard. Our backyard was a quirky collection of stuff, a concrete mixer, a couple of bikes, a kiddie pool for our dogs, and even a bike track. If these miscreants had tried to swipe any of that, I might have just rolled my eyes and let it slide. But it was crystal clear that they knew our yard layout like the back of their hand, from the gate to the camera placements. For days after this hair-raising ordeal, the fear of being home alone, especially at night, gnawed at me. The police did a quick neighborhood sweep before departing, but we haven't received any further updates about the situation. As I went about my daily routine, the unsettling feeling that something was terribly amiss clung to me like a shadow. It wasn't long before that feeling manifested into something more sinister, something I couldn't ignore. One evening, as I prepared to retire for the night, the atmosphere in our home seemed to shift. The air grew heavy with an unspoken dread, and every creak of the house echoed like a sinister whisper. I tried to dismiss it as mere imagination, but then it happened, a faint, rhythmic tapping on the bedroom window. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen, my eyes locked onto that cursed window. The tapping persisted, deliberate and unnerving, like the beat of a twisted lullaby. Slowly, I inched closer, my trembling hand reaching for my phone. I knew I had to call for help, but the fear of making a sound paralyzed me. Just as I began dialing 911, the tapping ceased and the shadowy figure outside retreated. When the police arrived this time, there was evidence. An intruder had left their mark. Fingerprints smeared on the window, footprints in the flower bed, and signs of forced entry. The malevolence that had been lurking outside had now found its way inside. Despite the police's assurances of increased patrols, the feeling of being watched never left us. When my boyfriend returned from his work assignment, he found me on the brink of insanity. We decided to take matters into our own hands, fortifying our home with additional security measures, reinforcing the windows, and setting up cameras throughout the house. One fateful night, we received a notification of our security app, and then we saw it. We stumbled upon a chilling truth. A real weird-looking man, twisted with malevolence, moving silently through our living room. His eyes, filled with madness, bore into the camera, and then the feed abruptly cut out. My husband and I exchanged terrified glances, our faces reflecting the same question. How the fuck did this man enter our home unnoticed? The sheer madness in his eyes sent a cold shiver down my spine, and I whispered to my husband that he should stay in the bedroom. We dared not to make a sound, and the eerie thing was that we hadn't heard any footsteps this whole time. It was as if he was hiding somewhere, waiting to jump on us. With trembling hands, we dialed 911, urgently calling for help. The police arrived promptly. They stormed inside, searched the whole house, but didn't find the madman. We presented them with the horrifying evidence. This time, they took it seriously, launching a full-scale investigation into the intruder's identity and motives. Their discoveries sent shivers down our spines. As it turned out, this man had a dark history of violent crimes, committed a murder in the past, and was for some reason fixated on our home. Was a disturbing revelation. In the end, with the police's help, we apprehended the man who had haunted us. He was taken away, and we moved far from that accursed place, hoping to escape the malevolent forces that had tormented us. I'm a 36-year-old guy, living in a ground-floor flat in a quiet seaside town in England with my girlfriend. The eerie incident I'm about to share happened on a Saturday night when I was all alone, and it still gives me chills. It was around 10:30 p.m., and I was in the middle of watching some YouTube videos, contemplating playing a game on my laptop. I had no inkling that the night would take such a terrifying turn. You see, my girlfriend had gone out with a couple of friends she hadn't seen in ages, and I decided to stay up late, waiting for her to return safely. Little did I know that safety would soon become a distant memory. As I was engrossed in my online entertainment, an unusual sound pierced the silence. The handle of my front door started rattling as if someone was hell-bent on barging in. Panic coursed through me. My girlfriend wasn't due back until closer to midnight, and unexpected late-night disturbances were far from ordinary. Curiosity mingled with fear, compelling me to investigate. I tiptoed toward the door, and as I neared it, the rattling inexplicably ceased. My heart raced as I peered through the peephole, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine. A man stood there, his back to me, hunched over as if lost in despair. The dimly lit hallway added an eerie aura to the already unsettling scene. I was torn between confronting this intruder and seeking safety. Convinced it could be a simple mix-up or some intoxicated soul who had lost his way, I retreated without revealing my presence. I hoped the stranger would realize his mistake and leave me in peace. However, about 30 minutes later, the same unsettling rattling noise echoed through the door once more. My nerves were stretched to the limit, and I sprang to my feet, determined to face this relentless intruder head-on. I flung the door open, ready to demand answers, but the man's bewildered expression and his sudden step backward as he saw me sent chills down my spine. My voice quivered with a blend of fear and anger as I sternly warned him, "I don't know who you are, but I caught you trying to open my door earlier. If you don't beat it right now, I'm dialing the police." He appeared to be a complete stranger, and his tired, hollow eyes and solemn demeanor only intensified my unease. He retreated towards the entrance of our apartment building, vanishing into the shadows, his head buried in his hands. My heart raced as I re-entered my flat, urgently advising him, "Just go home, man," before slamming the door shut behind me. Now I was torn about whether to involve the authorities, so I shot a text to my girlfriend, explaining the unnerving situation and urging her to give me a call when she was ready to come home. I wanted to ensure she wouldn't encounter the mysterious man lurking outside. As I anxiously awaited her call, I kept a watchful eye on the empty apartment entryway and stairwell. The night remained eerily quiet, and I didn't spot the stranger when it was time to pick up my girlfriend and her friends. When we got back home, my girlfriend speculated that he might have been a lost soul, perhaps a bit too tipsy, searching for a friend's residence. Though her theory made sense, a lingering unease lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't determine if the man had any connections in our building or if his intentions were more sinister. All I could do was hope he would stay away. I felt a profound sense of relief that we had always kept our front door locked and bolted that night, preventing who knows what kind of chilling encounter. The following day, I engaged in a conversation with some neighbors, hoping to uncover more about this mysterious intruder. It turned out that a few of them had spotted the man lurking around before, behaving strangely and making everyone uneasy. None of them had a clue about his intentions or what he was truly up to. In response to the unsettling experience, we decided to fortify the security around our flat. We installed sturdier locks and double-checked all the windows to ensure our safety. My girlfriend and I remained vigilant, watching for any signs of the enigmatic man, but he never reappeared. The memory of that spine-tingling night still lingers, leaving us to ponder if we will ever uncover the truth about the man who invaded our tranquility that fateful evening. I'm a girl, and this happened when I was just 13 years old. It was around Christmas, and my parents and little sister had gone out shopping, leaving me home alone. I cherished these moments when I had the house all to myself. My sister's shoes were by the front door instead of the garage, as she had left through there. I closed the door behind her and went back inside. A week before this incident, a boy from the grade above me had approached me during school pickup, trying to strike up a conversation. I was never particularly social, and his attempts at conversation had become a regular occurrence. I usually gave brief responses and avoided any prolonged interaction. On one occasion, he asked for my phone number, but I politely declined. After some persistence, he eventually gave up and left me alone. Now, back to the first day of Christmas break. It was evening, and my parents and sister wouldn't be back for a few hours. I decided to unplug the living room security camera to have some privacy for a while. I wanted to do some weird stuff without the risk of my parents watching it later. About an hour later, when it had grown dark outside, I closed all the blinds and made myself some noodles. While eating, I settled in at the living room watching some TV. Once I finished my dinner, I paused the movie to grab a cookie, and that's when I heard it. Faint footsteps coming from outside the house. My heart raced as I held my breath, trying to discern if it was just the house settling or something else. The footsteps continued, sounding much closer now. It was unmistakably the sound of someone walking outside in our backyard. Panicked, I turned off the TV and grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter. I quickly retreated to the bathroom, locking myself in. The pounding on the window, followed by eerie silence, only heightened my fear. Then I heard two voices outside, one male and one female. The silence went on for about 5 minutes. Carefully, I crept slowly toward the phone to call the police. But suddenly the landline rang, making me jump shit scareless. In the process, I dropped the knife, creating a loud echo in the living room. That's when a series of violent pounds struck the backyard door. I retrieved the knife and sought refuge in the small storage closet under the stairs. I had mentioned earlier that my sister left through the front door, and I closed it behind her. What I didn't realize at the time was that I had left the front door unlocked, a mistake that would haunt me. The front door opened and loud but slow footsteps entered the hall, sending shivers down my spine. I struggled to control my breathing, attempting to be as quiet as possible. I could hear the intruders moving through the house, their voices filled with anger. The male voice called out, "Where the hell are you, you little bitch? I know you're here." It seemed oddly familiar, possibly the boy from school. As expected, the closet door swung open, revealing the girl. Without thinking, I slashed at her with the knife. She screamed, blood dripping on the floor, and she slapped me hard enough to make me fall. The woman fled the house, slamming the front door shut behind her. Minutes of tense silence followed as I gathered myself. I locked the front door and quickly cleaned the blood from the floor using soap and water. I hadn't reached the phone in time to call the police, but the intruders were gone, so there seemed to be no immediate danger. It was only later, as I contemplated the events, that I realized the boy hadn't left. I searched the entire house, knife in hand, turning on all the lights and checking every nook and cranny, but I found no one. I cleaned up the mess left behind by the intruders and tried to make everything appear normal. When my parents and sister returned about 45 minutes later, they found me watching TV, unaware of the terrifying ordeal I had just experienced. To this day, I've never told my family what happened. I was afraid they would never allow me to stay home alone again, and I valued my privacy too much to risk losing it. My message to everyone is to stay safe and to trust your instincts. Sometimes the smallest actions can make all the difference in a life-threatening situation.